Hello, everyone, and thanks for inviting me along to speak. It may be the case that some of you will see me a second time this week because I'll be there for the launch of IAPS, the Institute of Advanced Automotive Propulsion, in its formal opening with Minister John Glenn on Thursday. And as many of you know, I'm now a member of Bath University as a professor of practice, and I'm delighted to be working with both the Institute of Sustainability and the Institute of Government on a number of programs, and was in the university just earlier this month giving a lecture on the process of the net zero review, how it came into being, how we put the review together, and what were some of the conclusions and government responses to the net zero review's recommendations. And actually, today I'm going to be focusing my comments both on the net zero review, but also on the wider issue of the role of hydrogen in delivering net zero. When I held the sort of 52 evidence roundtable, speaking to I think 1,000 participants and received 1,800 written responses, often the pathway towards net zero is becoming clearer, and there are certain avenues we know we need to take, particularly around the deployment of renewables. But there are other areas that are a bit more hazy, which sometimes actually, when I sort of chaired those roundtables, I sort of sat back and heard various parts of the sector arguing amongst each other, undecided as to exactly what the right solutions might be for the future. And that's why it's so important that when it comes to delivering on net zero, I've always said we need to create a net zero technology roadmap, one that doesn't just look forwards into the future, planning out various stage by stage processes, but one that works backwards, trying to understand what the overall sort of energy and electricity mix will be, not just for 2050, but for 2030, how we get there. But crucially, we get there understanding that there will be new innovations, new technologies that will come on stream, and also the failure of certain markets that we need to anticipate and understand where we do need to deploy alternative investments, alternative sources of energy if one of those fails. And it was, I think, the use of hydrogen that remains still unpredictable. That when we look at the uses, if we take Michael Liebrick's hydrogen ladder, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, we've come to a settled opinion that industrial decarbonisation will require the use of hydrogen. That is absolutely essential for decarbonising those heavy industries that can't be done so through electrification alone. And there's some incredibly exciting work that's taking place, and I'm sure Jane Toogood, the UK's hydrogen champion, will be speaking about that with you. But then there is that sort of less settled question about where do we extend the use of hydrogen, whether that's into the transport market or whether that's into the domestic market. We've seen recently the failure of the hydrogen heating trial in Whitby that's been shut down, and still that vexed question, as I said, between the roundtables that I held, that question over the future of hydrogen for home heating, probably one of the ones where you had sort of those passions arguments between people taking part in the net zero review. Personally, and I have to sometimes differentiate between my formal role as an independent chair, balancing and weighing up all the evidence with my own sort of personal opinion, that use of hydrogen for home heating will be limited. We may see it in close by to industrial centres that are producing excess of hydrogen, whether that's near sort of HyNet, for example, or elsewhere where we've got net zero industrial hubs. But at the moment, we simply won't be producing enough hydrogen to be used in a variety of locations. It's a scarce resource, and we need to plan out well where it is used. And when it comes to hydrogen itself, I took forward a piece of work with Jane Toogood for the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, looking at where are the regulatory opportunities for developing the green technologies of tomorrow. One of those, obviously, is making sure that when we come to scale and deploy hydrogen, we can do so in a way that means that we don't make the perfect the enemy of the good. Internationally, I'm somewhat concerned that there seems to be a dash for green hydrogen, that somehow we are going to enable this sort of perfect sort of fuel generated by sort of renewables to be deployed at mass scale. And so we've already sorted out the transportation storage arrangement for this. Where we know the reality, certainly for the UK, will be very different. We will be dependent upon the production of blue hydrogen, to start with, that we will see this being generated in the industrial hubs, as has already been sort of set out in very detailed business models, such as HyNet, such as Net Zero Teesside, such as the Acorn development in Scotland. What we don't want to see is somehow that we disempower that use of blue hydrogen for the sake of a rush to green hydrogen. And ultimately, we don't have this sort of false rainbow taxonomy perpetuating, because it does no one any good in the longer term. So why the UK has called for a low carbon hydrogen standard to be developed is to recognise that we are on a transition towards better low carbon forms of hydrogen, but we're not going to get there immediately. And so understanding the limitations of the demand side, but also how we can ensure that we don't put additional limitations on the supply side is really important. But at the same time, how we balance both the demand and the supply side so that they come through together at the same time. It's a really delicate balancing act at the moment. We know that we don't have enough supply of hydrogen, but at the same time, we don't have the offtake and the demand to generate the supply. You all know this. So therefore, how do we ensure that we've got that sort of program in place? And for me, in the Net Zero Review, it was all about setting out the certainty, the clarity, the consistency that we need around policy frameworks. So a lot of those policy frameworks will come forward in the energy bill that's due to pass into law. Hopefully, I think on the 19th of October, it's got its final piece of legislation to tick off. And that will see a number of business models be put in place that will provide regulatory stability for the future deployment of hydrogen. But at the same time, we need to sort of focus then on what is that long-term strategy, what is that long-term vision for the deployment of hydrogen. In Germany, they have a hydrogen strategy that is set out over 10 years, worth £10 billion. In the US, we now have hydrogen prices of $3 a kilo, with the aim of reaching $1 a kilo by 2030. But again, a commitment to a price point that is set with the potential to produce a profit if then the overall price of hydrogen does come down to $1 a kilo, that actually will stabilize business investment, can set that certain path for the future. In the UK, while we have that welcome commitment of £20 billion for CCUS over 20 years and a commitment to moving forwards with the next phases of the industrial hub process into the Acorn development, into Hull, nevertheless, I don't feel that there is that sort of stable framework, that long-term stable framework in place for hydrogen yet. We have the hydrogen fund, the Hydrogen Innovation Fund, £240 million over a 3-year period. And we really need to break out of that spending review cycle now if we're going to set that long-term certain path for hydrogen. If we can do it for nuclear, if we can do it for CCUS, we should be able to do it for hydrogen also. Then there are those decisions to be taken over the use of hydrogen, which both should prioritize the industrial use of hydrogen, not just at a hub level, but far more widely, thinking through the industrial sites that are permeated across the United Kingdom. So thinking about dispersed sites, where is hydrogen going to be operable in these sites? And working very closely with the hydrogen hubs that have been set up that I think really effectively have taken a lead. Government obviously must provide the certainty, the regulatory certainty, the funding certainty and finance certainty. But at the same time, the on-the-ground efforts that I've seen myself touring around the country really demonstrate that local industry is thinking about the use of hydrogen, creating these hydrogen deployment roadmaps at a local level, almost an itinerary of understanding where are the opportunities and where it could be deployed and where future partnerships can be created. And that opportunity to collaborate is essential for understanding how we can build out a hydrogen supply chain. It will be by businesses and industries sharing a common hydrogen gas grid network that also needs to be developed, repurposing the gas grid network at an industrial scale for that will be essential, but it's worthwhile building those relationships, understanding where those networks will need to be developed in advance of any future decision making that needs to be taken. And then when it comes to looking at hydrogen and understanding that long-term pathway, setting out not just a hydrogen strategy, but a hydrogen fund, it would be absolutely essential. Actually, it was one of the mission recommendations, one of the 10-year missions in the Net Zero Review was to set out an industrial mission. And I'm actually now working with an industrial mission zero network that includes IDRIC, the Industrial Decarbonisation Research Innovation Centre, and a number of members at Bath University to focus on exactly what that mission might look like, what the 10-year strategy might look like, not just for hydrogen, but industrial decarbonisation at scale. And the prize for us is one that doesn't just solve the UK's net zero challenge. I would say when you look at what we can achieve with hydrogen, it is not just about thinking that we are solving the decarbonisation of these industrial centres. If we can create the effective innovation, the effective models for demonstrating how to do this well, we can export this abroad. We have an opportunity, an export opportunity to understand how we can deliver decarbonisation, industrial decarbonisation using hydrogen. And maybe in the distant future, if things go outstandingly beyond our wildest expectations, we will see an opportunity to export hydrogen off the grid. It plays an enormous role potentially on ensuring that we can tackle challenges around intermittency on the grid. If I was going into business, I would probably want to set up a hydrogen electrolyzer business in an ideal world. The level of demand for hydrogen electrolyzers, where the UK can also sort of lead on this with a number of companies already winning contracts internationally, is enormous. It's estimated that the export market that the EU requires alone for hydrogen electrolyzers will go up by 650 times. That it's looking for 40 gigawatts worth of electrolyzer capacity. So there are enormous opportunities, and that feeds back into this narrative of the Net Zero Review. But yes, there are challenges. There are many challenges around hydrogen, its deployment, how we ensure that the regulations allow it to be stored safely, to be transported safely. But we will find solutions for those. These are challenges that we face, but they're not too difficult to be solved. And it's through innovation, the university sector that was working at pace to find answers to those specific challenges that will ultimately bring down the learning cost of the technology. And while green hydrogen at the moment remains frustratingly out of touch and out of price, that price will come down. We can watch this back in 10 years' time, and we will see the destination of travel. We have a certainty now that we will need hydrogen and that it needs to be deployed, and that we need to therefore find the financial mechanisms to make that deployment as rapid as possible. But there will be opportunities, particularly in the UK, with its wind and solar resources, to see the deployment of green hydrogen in the future. And we need to be ready with a future export market of that. There are partner countries such as Germany that are willing and ready to be able to take an offtake of hydrogen, given their situation of being dependent on 80% of their energy resources from energy exports. But we need to keep that not just at the forefront of our mind, but to understand we need to prioritize and understand how we can deliver a hydrogen industry that's going to be sustainable, an industry that works to transition those workers in oil and gas, in offshore industries that through no fault of their own are high carbon. They have the skills, they have the ability to then work also in a hydrogen industry, making sure that as we build out this future industry, we take the people with us, we ensure we have the necessary skills in place also. It sounds hard. It is hard. None of this is ever easy. But then I think, as John F. Kennedy says, we do these things not because they are easy, but because they are hard. It truly is a mission, and a mission that the UK can continue to lead the world on if we make the right term investments, if we set the right long-term certainty, if we demonstrate to the rest of the world how this can be done most effectively. And I do believe, regardless of what's happening stateside with the Inflation Reduction Act, regardless of the incentives that have been put in place in the US, the UK does still continue to lead when it comes to hydrogen innovation, when it comes to hydrogen business models, when it comes to the opportunity to deploy hydrogen in a place-based approach, because ultimately it's that place-based approach that will deliver greater efficiencies, as the Net Zero Review demonstrated. We have those hubs in place, we have the industrial centres in place, and we have a workforce willing to make the transition. So I'm incredibly hopeful that the future of net zero does involve hydrogen. It involves hydrogen in a range of technologies that recognizes that we have to be agile, we have to be flexible in order to see the most successful deployment possible. But I look forward to working with all of you in both the near and the distant future on ensuring that we make that success happen for the UK. Thank you very much.